questions towards the end of the presentation. This call is being recorded, so if you do have any objections, please disconnect. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn the call over to our Vice President of Servicing Performance Management, Don Griffin. Don?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Busy 24 hours. We published 2 bulletins in the past 24 hours, and I'm happy to report that Ryan McGinnis from our Servicing Policy Group is going to review the highlights. So I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Don. And thanks, everybody, for joining today. As Don mentioned, we have had a busy couple of days, and sure, it's a lot to take in for all of the servicers, so happy to have the opportunity today to walk through it with you and take your questions. So we're gonna cover the new guide bulletins from yesterday and today. That's Bulletin 2020-15 and 16. Do a summary of the COVID-19 payment deferral from yesterday's bulletin and compare that to the regular payment deferral we announced in March. Do an overview of the default reporting reminders and requirements, and then we'll jump into Q&A. So with that, let's dive right in. All right, so new guide bulletin as of yesterday, we announced the COVID-19 payment deferral. So as all of you know, we did announce the regular payment deferral solution in March to address situations that really weren't necessarily related to COVID-19. It could, of course, be used at the time, at the time we said that it would be able to be used if applicable in COVID-19 situations, but there were a lot of characteristics of the program that would have made that less applicable to borrowers coming out of a forbearance. So we wanted to address that, and that's something that I think you'll see that we did in the bulletin, and something that we'll talk a little bit more about in a couple of slides. But just at a high level, the payment deferral is in place to help borrowers who had a temporary hardship and have resolved that hardship and are now in a position where they can't afford to reinstate or do a repayment plan, but don't need additional payment relief either from something like a flex mod. How do we get those borrowers to reinstate? So both programs, the regular payment deferral and the COVID-19 payment deferral, are designed similarly in a way that gets those borrowers back to current by deferring the delinquent amounts, with some minor differences in how we get to that, and then some more significant differences in how we evaluate those borrowers. So we will cover that in more detail in a couple of slides. Another thing to point out here is that the new version, the COVID-19 payment deferral, is mandatory effective on July 1st of 2020. So that is a difference between the regular payment deferral, which wasn't mandatory until January 1st of 2021. But important to emphasize on that, these borrowers impacted by COVID-19, as you all know and understand, are going to start to need assistance coming out of these forbearance plans. We think this is the best solution for borrowers who can afford their payments to provide for them. So we want to make sure that we can get this done and get this out there as fast as we can. So we are going to require that July 1st, 2020 date as implementation date, and all the rest of the details can be found in the 2020-15 bulletin. But as I said, we're going to go through a little bit more of those details in just a couple of slides. So next slide. And then we followed that up this morning with another guide bulletin, and this one addressed several topics, mostly follow-ups to some previous announcements and more reminders and things of that nature. So the first, we extended the COVID-19 foreclosure moratorium through June 30th of 2020. So of course that was set to end in just 3 days on the 17th of this month, and now we have extended that to the end of June. For property inspections for delinquent mortgages, we had previously announced, given servicers flexibilities to not conduct property inspections in certain situations, including for delinquent mortgages. What we're saying now, we're kind of doubling down on that and actually taking a step further and say if the mortgage was unless the mortgage was delinquent and vacant or abandoned prior to March 1st, which is the effective date for the national emergency declaration, then you must not conduct those property inspections. So it is a more hardline requirement in those cases. Now for EDR, we just more of a reminder. We want to make sure that we're keeping these reminders coming on the EDR until we start to see, I think, a little bit more consistency on our end in the systems with what we see reported. But we want to make sure you understand, report the 032 related to the COVID-19 hardships, and then if there is a forbearance plan, you do report both the 032 and the 09. So it's not enough to just do one or the other. So please make sure you are reporting both codes when you have the COVID-19 related hardship with a forbearance that is begun and is in effect. For property valuations, for short sales and deeds in lieu of foreclosure, we got a lot of questions, especially coming directly to our operations department, related to whether you could use the values that we were providing for short sales and deeds in lieu, because although we do provide the values and you use the values we provide, we also do say in the guide that the values have to be based on internal BPOs or appraisals. And in many cases, we're now providing values based on external valuations. So we just want to make clear and give you some assurance that you can use and actually must use our values, even though they may be external values, and that you are in compliance when you do so. Okay, so another clarification. Really, this one is actually kind of more of a change than a clarification. Generally, a borrower who has been modified under HAMP remains in good standing unless they become 90 days delinquent or greater, or the loan gets modified or goes through something like a payment deferral that changes the terms from what was agreed upon and put into place with the HAMP agreement under the terms of HAMP. So in conjunction with what has been put out as additional guidance on non-GSE loans for Treasury, we have agreed to update our requirements so that a borrower who enters into a COVID-19 forbearance plan and is still in good standing will maintain their status of being in good standing throughout that forbearance plan. And additionally, if that borrower comes out, doesn't come out, but transfers directly from the COVID-19 forbearance plan to a repay plan, reinstatement, or even a COVID-19 payment deferral, they will maintain that good standing as long as they, effectively make it through that program, and for the COVID-19 payment deferral that it settles and they get back to current, or for the repayment plan that they complete the repayment plan and get back to current, they would maintain that good standing under HAMP. So that does represent a change for us. We are still continuing to work on some additional clarifications with MHA and Treasury and Fannie Mae on some of the nuances of other aspects of this, but rest assured, as of today, the borrower going into it, if they go into a forbearance plan and come directly out of that plan into one of those three options I just mentioned and complete that and get back to current, they will not lose their good standing as long as they were still in good standing going in. So that is all in today's Bulletin 2020-16. And with that, we can move to the next slide. Okay, so here we're going to do a little bit of a comparison over this slide and the following one of what's changed for the payment deferral to the COVID-19 payment deferral and what's the same. So some key things that are the same. It does involve the borrower who has a resolved hardship. So we are going to ask that you, or require that you establish quality right party contact in most cases with borrowers. And I say in most cases because if you take a look at the bulletin, you'll see there is a carve out where traditionally when a borrower comes out of a forbearance plan for a disaster or now for COVID-19 forbearance, if you're unable to establish QRPC while on the forbearance and transition that borrower into a workout option or to reinstate the mortgage, and you're going to be required to evaluate the borrower for previously a streamlined offer for FlexMod. And what we're updating that to say you'll actually be evaluating those borrowers for a streamlined offer for a COVID-19 payment deferral in those cases. So if they're eligible for that, they'll get it. If they're not, you'd still send the FlexMod if they're eligible for that. And then if not, of course, you would just continue down the path to foreclosure if you're still unable to make contact with that borrower. But we've given a little bit of kind of layered optionality. It's not pure optionality. You can't choose one or the other. It would be first evaluate for payment deferral, then FlexMod. But generally, and what we hope happens all the time, is that you're able to establish quality right party contact while in the forbearance. It doesn't expire, and you don't have to send these streamline offers, but you actually get to get the information required to make an informed decision and put that borrower in the best solution for them. So when that is the case, it will operate the same way in terms of establishing QRPC as the payment deferral does. Establishing QRPC, determining that the borrower's hardship's been resolved, determining that they cannot afford the reinstatement, they cannot afford the repayment plan, and that they don't really need, the payment relief that comes with a flex mod. And so if the borrower is able to maintain their payments, then this is a good solution for them, and it will be likely the solution that they end up with if that's the situation they find themselves in. So what is different? Well, of course, the program as it was created wasn't really intended to be applied to borrowers coming out of a forbearance or borrowers in later stage delinquency, but that's where we find ourselves now. Is that's the scenario that we're presented with. So we want to solve for that. So one of the obvious differences is hardship, because it's got to be a COVID-19 related hardship, but then the deferral term. So in the regular payment deferral, it's 1 or 2 months. So you're either 30 or 60 months down, and that's what can get deferred. Under the COVID-19, it's up to 12 months of missed payments can be deferred. So that should be able to help with a lot more of those transitions from forbearance. Another thing I will say, though, is that forbearance is not a prerequisite. It's not required. It's definitely preferred if you have a borrower who has a COVID-19 related hardship that they should be on a forbearance plan if they're becoming increasingly delinquent. But, if you did have a borrower, you weren't able to get a hold of them, they never made it on forbearance, but they were current prior to the current or one payment past due prior to the effective date of the National Emergency Declaration on March 1st, then they might be eligible without having been on forbearance. One other thing I'll mention about the number of payments that can be included in the deferral, another difference with the payment deferral versus the new version, the COVID-19 version, is that under the regular payment deferral, you're only deferring principal and interest. And under this version, we're also permitting you to defer any other amounts that can be capitalized under flex mod terms generally, which in most cases for this type of program where most of these borrowers are going to be on forbearance and there's a foreclosure moratorium, there's not going to be those kind of costs associated with a foreclosure. Most of the other amounts that might be deferred would be advances that you've paid for making taxes and insurance payments for the borrower, or advances for escrow to pay those taxes and insurance. Those amounts can also be deferred, so the borrower is not going to have to make those up over time. Although, just like always, an escrow shortage, if you've identified that, is something that happens separately outside of the loss mid option and has to be collected directly from the borrower. Okay, so next thing, borrower eligibility. This lines up with what we have in place generally for our special COVID-19 requirements and disaster type requirements, where the borrower has to have been current or less than 31 days delinquent as of March 1st, which is the date of the National Emergency Declaration. Similar to how we've done this with what we had in place previously for Extend Mod and Cap and Extend Mod and special requirements for Flex Mod. We will allow these reduced eligibility criteria and allow a borrower to be eligible for an option like this that gets them back to their regular payment if the hardship reason under special circumstances like COVID-19 pandemic, like a disaster, are truly what caused the delinquency. So we want to make sure that borrower is current or only one payment past due, as of basically the start point of this pandemic, and for a disaster, it's similar as of the start point for a disaster. So that's the thinking behind that type of a requirement, which, you're probably familiar with it as it's been in place in disaster for a long time. And we had previously announced it for the 3 mods that we have had in place for COVID-19 response. And then similarly, we also matched up the delinquency requirement as of the eval date with what had been in place for Extend Mod and Cap and Extend. So the borrower must be at least 31 days delinquent, but less than or equal to actually a full year delinquent. So it only goes up to one year of delinquency, and you can only defer those 12 payments. Okay, next slide, please. Now, if you've seen the bulletin today and had a chance to look at it, and if you've heard some of the comments I've just made about Extend Mod and Cap and Extend, where I said what we had been requiring, If you look at the hierarchy on the right, you will not see the extend mod or the cap and extend mod there. Instead, you will see just the COVID-19 payment deferral. So as of July 1st, the COVID-19 payment deferral replaces the extend mod and the cap and extend mod in our COVID-19 waterfall hierarchy and waterfall. So that does not impact yet, at least yet, what we're doing in the disaster space. They're not gone entirely. We're going to evaluate that separately. But as far as the COVID-19 response goes, as of July 1st, the payment deferral will replace those options. And we feel that it is a better option than both of those. I think it's been a pretty common request in the industry that people want to have this a deferral. People have been talking about it. It's been in the news. It's been everywhere. So we have the capability now to offer that up to 12 months delinquent. It has an advantage over the extend mod in that you can defer those advances for interest, for taxes and insurance and for escrow, whereas extend mod, sometimes there's payment shocks. Sometimes the borrower has to make those up over time. And then also it doesn't capitalize delinquent interest. It simply defers it straight to that non-interest bearing balance. So the interest bearing balance goes down with the delinquent principal and interest getting deferred, and the borrower doesn't end up paying interest on top of interest, which was always the criticism of the cap and extend. So this solution is able to solve both of those issues and still provide the exact same post-solution experience for the borrower, where now they're back to their regular payment and on their regular payment schedule. So we're very happy with being able to introduce this, and we think it's going to be a really good option. The rest of the other good thing about this actually is it makes the regular hierarchy, which you see on the left under payment deferral, pretty much the same as the COVID-19 payment deferral hierarchy. So there's a lot less explanation that needs to go into your talk off with borrowers about what's available to them. Those options are just different versions of the same thing. Where with payment deferral to COVID-19, it's all the changes we just talked about. It's available to later in delinquency, but the solution itself, is a payment deferral. And for FlexMod, similar. We do have the reduced eligibility criteria under our special requirements for COVID-19, as we've described in our bulletins. But it is, nevertheless, it's a FlexMod, right? So these are all we're going to the same options, just enhanced versions of the same options. So it should kind of simplify the hierarchy, simplify the talk off for you, and provide an option that we really believe in. And then we do have this note at the bottom. We might be updating this. So as of today, or as of when our announcement went out, it appears to us that the system enhancements wouldn't be done until July 13th. So what we were telling you to do is evaluate starting July 1st. Just don't submit them to us until July 13th. I have heard today that it is possible that we might be able to update that in the coming weeks or months where our system will be able to take those in earlier, perhaps even as soon as July 1st. So stay tuned on that. Possibly more updates to come, but in any case, you have assurance that you can start those evaluations on July 1st. Okay. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John Felix, to go over default reporting.
Thanks, Ryan. And then here we just wanted to kind of talk about some, really some reminders again. Report all eligible mortgages that are delinquent due to COVID-19. And as Ryan said, the 32 is for the reason code. And if you have a forbearance, please be sure you're reporting the default action code 09, or if it was repayment plan, the code 12. But it is very important to report both those codes if the borrower has a hardship due to COVID-19 to 32, and then the appropriate action code that goes along with that hardship. I know we have seen some where we're just getting the 32, maybe not the 09, in some cases the 09 without the 32. So just make sure that you're consistent in reporting those codes to us. And also, as point of reference, when you're reporting the forbearance to us, and it's, for instance, going to be the June 1st payment that is going to be forborne, please give us the date, the first of the month, that it's the payment date that should be associated with the forbearance that you're reporting to us. That begin date should be the payment due date that is associated with the forbearance plan. That was it for the default reporting. But I think here it was just showing kind of when you're in the system and actually reporting the codes to us. You can see when you go in through Gateway and you're reporting, enter into single loan information, just kind of have highlighted here the 32 for the National Emergency Declaration, and then below you have the action code with the date associated with there to the right. You see the action date. So just add the 32 and the respective action code, be it forbearance, repayment plan, and then the action date that is associated with that.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Ryan. So at this time, we'll go ahead and open the phone lines for any questions that our attendees have. So if you do have a question, go ahead and select the raise hand icon on the right side of your screen, and we will unmute your phone line. Or again, feel free to type in your question via chat. All right. It looks like Nisha has a question. Your line is open.
Yes. Hi. How are you? I just wanted to piggyback off of the question in regards to when we're reporting the default code of the 09 and we're reporting it as the payment due date. Does that payment due date code also apply to when we're reporting in as far as the repayment plan? So when we're reporting the action date, the action code for the repayment plan, do we also select the first of the month for the actual due date for the date that we're reporting it for as well?
Yes, and just on that, it would be the 32 is the reason for default, and then the action code would either be the forbearance plan or the repayment plan. So yes.
Correct, with the payment due date for both, as
Correct.
far as for either the repayment or the forbearance as well.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Next question comes from Tizinia. Tizinia, your line is open.
Yes, hi. I was reading the Bulletin 2020-15, and under the, we refer to the payment deferral agreement. Am I understanding correctly that we are not required to use that? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we often provide you templates that you can use, but we don't require you to use our templates. We just require that you provide, the adequate amount of information to the borrower on the offer that you're making. And so there are some specifics in the bulletin about that, about how a borrower can accept an offer, what information needs to be included for that. And then just generally, we do ask that you use our agreement template as kind of a standard, and at least try to provide a similar level of information that we include in our template.
Okay, and that for that, so suppose the customer, is eligible for the payment deferral, and we did our due diligence to see that the customer is okay, and it would be okay, in my opinion, to use the agreement so that it has a kind of an explanation of what that means for the customer. And that's the only things eventually will be done with the customer. And then the second part for the service will be to report on workout prospector, correct?
Yeah, so generally what we require is that you establish quality right party contact, and you can do that in a number of different ways. And if you've done that and you've evaluated the borrower in accordance with all the requirements you saw in the bulletin, then yeah, you would give the borrower the agreement. It's up to you whether you get a signature or not. It's not required, but it's something you can require. And you report through Workout Prospector, and then there are some other processing requirements. like you have to send the agreement to the dock custodian. So that's across the board. You're always going to have to do that. And then it's going to probably not be necessary for you to do things like recordation and stuff like that, but you just should look at the requirements and just make sure. But basically, you only have to do that to protect our first lien position if it's necessary, and we leave that to your discretion whether you need to do that.
Thank you.
Great. Next question comes from Sherry. Sherry, your line is open.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, Sherry.
Okay, so hi, how are you? So anyhow, I put my questions on chat, so I understood from the last caller that I do have to go into workout prospector when I get to the point where there's going to be an actual modification. My biggest concern and question is on the COVID-19 deferral program, where we're going to, like, let's say we skipped 6 payments, or we deferred 6 payments, and we're going to add those to the back end of my loan. What am I going to have to do from a systems perspective? Because I'm obviously going to have to bump out my due date 6 months if that's what we've agreed to. What about all that interest and the principal? How do I handle that on my core?
So I don't know if Shuba or somebody wants to provide an operational overview. I'm certainly not a systems expert, but I mean, you're going to be deferring the delinquent amounts into a non-interest bearing balance and advancing the due date of last paid installment to bring the mortgage current. So effectively, just like with a flex mod where you'd have that non-interest bearing balance, you're going to have that here, and that's where all the delinquent principal and interest and advances goes. And then you're essentially just kind of picking up at the next payment that would have been due.
So it's probably just something that my core provider is going to have to figure out.
So this is Shuba, and we have a new release that will be implemented in July that is specifically for this program, and it has specific fields where it will ask you to enter certain information. So it will ask for the forbear amount, like how many principals, how many payments you are missing, what else are you adding escrow. So there is also a training plan for this, and I recommend everybody takes training for that. But the screens are extremely clear. I just got a demo of it today.
Right. So that's your core may be different than my core. So I'm on Jack Henry.
Oh, okay. Well, I've also talked to Jack Henry, and they are trying to figure. I mean, they asked us questions about this, so I'm thinking they will be doing something about that.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Next question comes from Kevin. Kevin, your line is open.
Thank you. So, gents, regarding the prior to today's bulletin, when we get to the permanent solutions, whether it's the cap and extend or the flex, I'm going to guess we use the suggested modification agreement in Exhibit 76 for those. That's my presumption, but I wanted to ask that.
Yeah, and modify it as necessary to
right, to tailor it, obviously. Right.
Right.
Okay. It sure looked that way to me. And then secondly, I think they just talked about the answer of when you're doing advances, that obviously of principal, interest, and escrow, whatever, that clearly doesn't get added on to the principal of the existing loan, but it's sitting somewhere else.
So yeah, I mean, it gets created. We create a non-interest-bearing balance. So while yes, it becomes principal, but it's not interest-bearing principal. So what happens is, with the UPB of the loan, that the interest-bearing balance is actually reduced by the principal interest, by the principal amount that would have been due for all those missed payments, and the non-interest-bearing balance, will take in the principal, interest, and advances, and it will become due at the maturity of the mortgage or payoff date or whatever comes earlier.
But that's on each bank side, I presume, that piece. It's not going to sit. You guys aren't going to be funding that as an additional piece onto the principal as a 100% participant, I presume.
I'm not sure I'm following.
So if we're putting those in a field, that's on the bank side, I presume, for each customer, not on your side. Your balance is going to stay the same.
So no, I mean our balance will change to reflect the change to the terms on our side. We will reimburse you for any advances you made to us on interest, and of course you don't advance to us for principal.
Right.
And essentially, then we're kind of we basically kind of lent that interest until the end of the loan. When we wait till then to recoup it.
Okay, so when you do reimburse us, we are picking up those pieces.
Yes.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Great. Next question comes from Kendra. Kendra, your line is open. Hey, Kendra.
On the foreclosure moratorium, if the borrower, like I have a borrower that was already a year delinquent and in the thick of foreclosure when the CARES Act hit, one, I know that we are required to put them on the forbearance. I mean, do we just wait until the moratorium ends? Do we pick the forbearance back up? Or I don't know what they're going to be eligible for when it's over.
So yeah, if you were those are they're separate, but obviously I guess I see your point. I mean, there's some similarities between a moratorium and a forbearance, of course, because the forbearance would also essentially provide a moratorium on the foreclosure. But we wouldn't say to wait for the moratorium to be over. If you've made contact with the borrower and they want forbearance, put them in the forbearance now. But the moratorium's in place really as a net to catch those borrowers that aren't on forbearance, and there's the protections are just in place for now temporarily, where no foreclosure actions are taking place for a specified and temporary period. The forbearance will provide additional protections, though, on things like credit reports and other pieces that are touched on by the CARES Act. So forbearance is always better. To get the borrower on forbearance it's a better situation. So we would certainly recommend you try to do that with any delinquent borrower who you've made contact with or who's made contact with you. But again, that moratorium's in place too on top of it, so it is also there.
Hey Ryan, it's Ben. You did say it, but I just want to hit on this point again, which is two things. One, if the borrower has contacted you, they were already in foreclosure. The moratoriums, doesn't matter. If they contact you and need forbearance under the CARES Act, you have to give it to them, and don't wait to do it. Specifically, do not wait to do it, because then you're just adding time onto this. The moratorium is not to help the borrower become eligible for loss mitigation. That's not the point of the foreclosure moratorium. That is more or less specifically designed to ensure that people are not going to be evicted or lose their home and have nowhere to live in the middle of all of this. That's not to help somebody get loss mitigation. That's what forbearance is for.
Thank you.
All right. Next question comes from Joe. Joe, your line is open.
Yes, I had a question about the non-interest UPB on the ones that do the deferrals. Of course, it looks like the maturities are going to be bumped out, so it's kind of a balloon at the end of the loan. If a customer were to, as they go along, and a customer was to pay a little extra and get their loan paid down before maturity, the principal and interest bearing, would they be able to use the months until maturity to pay the interest UPB off slowly, or non-interest UPB off over that time?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's a really good question. So it depends. The answer is it depends, really. But the way that we have laid out how payments are to be applied in those situations when there's a non-interest-bearing balance is that when you get to if a borrower is putting more towards principal, interest-bearing principal over time, as many do, and certainly nothing wrong with that, then they might get to where their balance is lower, well before the maturity date in some cases. And what we require is that if the borrower gets to a balance that is such that a payment would reduce that balance to zero, basically, that you instead apply it to the non-interest bearing balance and put that balance down over time. So we kind of have that established in our guide to protect against a borrower suddenly having all these payments become due. But in the event that it would get paid off early, then the balloon does become due once there is no interest-bearing balance.
So you keep making their loan payment, and it would shift to the non-interest whenever the loan payment actually would be more than the pay out the principal and interest due. Okay.
Right. So yeah. So if they make a payment if they make any payment that wouldn't reduce it to exactly zero, then that's how it would get applied. If it goes more than that amount, and I'd have to check the language, to be honest. It's in the guide. I can't recall if it's the payment would reduce the balance to zero or go beyond that, or if it's just if it goes beyond that. But I can check on that and get back to you. But at minimum, it's that, like, let's say you have $10 left on your interest-bearing balance and you make your regular payment, then the regular payment would go to the non-interest-bearing balance because it was a higher amount than what was due under the interest-bearing. And I think it might actually even be that you can't reduce it to zero and call the non-interest-bearing amount due if it's paid off early like that.
Okay, and then it'd be up to us to figure out on our system how to handle that, how to get it to credit the non-interest and all that.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing is, you probably have quite a while to work that out, and then also, most loans don't get to maturity.
Right.
But something that we are also looking at, and with all of our loans that have non-interest-bearing balances for HAMP and standard mods, everything. So yeah, we will be looking at that, and we'll probably at some point in the future provide guidance. But we do in our guide today have the requirements I was just kind of going over that shifts the payment to the non-interest-bearing balance to protect the borrower from having a large balloon early.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great. Next question comes from Taylor. Taylor, your line is open.
Hey there. Is there any issue with putting a borrower on one of these forbearance plans for the COVID-19 while also they are in active bankruptcy?
No, we don't have bankruptcy as a means to preclude a borrower from eligibility for forbearance. So you would just have to adhere to the terms of the bankruptcy, but otherwise that wouldn't disqualify them based on our eligibility.
So I ask because in the EDR guide, the quick reference guide, it says that you will sometimes get an error if you report a borrower in forbearance while the borrower is in active bankruptcy.
So I don't know if that's just, and John, feel free to step in. I don't know if that's just because the system can't accommodate the multiple codes in that space or what that might be there for, but I can tell you from a policy perspective, you would never be in violation of Freddie Mac policy for that reason.
Yeah, Brian, I'd have to take a look at that to see if that's what it is, not being able to accept multiple, but we can take a look at that and then get back to you guys on that.
Yeah, just so you know, it was data error message 529, and we were like scouring everything for this, and we were just like, we just want to make sure we're doing the right thing, not only for the borrower, but also with Freddie Mac. So, are you saying this applies to all chapters?
Yeah, I mean, there are no exclusions related to bankruptcy at all for forbearance.
What about repayment? Because I saw you mentioned repayment on some slides previously. Like anything with that, or same thing as forbearance?
No, same thing. I mean, again, sometimes there might be requirements as part of the bankruptcy that you have to work out with them, but in terms of eligibility on our end, there would be nothing that would preclude you from entering into either of those.
Perfect.
Yeah, generally you'll need to get the bankruptcy trustee's approval, specifically on the repayment or trial plan options. I'm not 100% sure if forbearance is, but any time that the borrower is going to repay the debt in a way that's different from the terms of the chapter 11, 12, or 13 plan, you're going to need to get bankruptcy trustee approval to amend the plan.
Yeah.
All right. Next question comes from Janice. Janice, your line is open.
Hi, thank you. So my question is for those customers that have COVID forbearances that come out at the end of May. Is it still kind of the hierarchy of reinstatement and repayment for the month of June, since the option of COVID deferral isn't available till July?
So yeah, I mean, until July, the payment deferral is not officially part of the hierarchy. So we do have the regular, the previously announced COVID-19 hierarchy would still be in place. So that we still do have things like the cap and extend in place there.
Okay.
Or, you could also talk to the borrower about, extending the forbearance for another month and maybe even making a payment during that month if they're able to.
Okay.
But having those forbearance protections, because of course under all the mods they're going to have to go through a 3-month trial period plan anyway. So, we wouldn't discourage that. I wouldn't want to encourage further delinquency if they're ready to pay, but keep the protection of the forbearance in place and encourage them to make their payment and tell them about the option that would be available the following month. And I think that's fine.
Okay, and then I have another question too, if you don't mind. The deferral program, as far as, and somebody had asked this earlier, I just wanted to make sure, the documents that we need to put into Workout Prospector, they don't have to mimic your agreement template, but is it okay if it is the same deferral template that you would typically use out of COVID?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we provide that for your use, and again, not required, but we certainly are good with you using them if you want to.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Next question comes from Connie. Connie, your line is open.
Hi, thank you. I believe I just got my question answered. I had just tuned in mid-presentation, so I couldn't make out the first half. So my question was if the plan was effective, I guess immediately, but it's effective July 1st, correct? So those that are in forbearances right now, it's not like we can convert their current forbearance into a deferral or offer a deferral if a borrower was to call in today, current due for May. They wouldn't be eligible just because the plan is not effective until July 1st.
So yeah, the evaluations can start on July 1st. So if the scenario you just said though, with the borrower call in due for May, they could still get the forbearance, which suspends their payments, and if they're unable to make their payment, and a deferral wouldn't. The payment deferral that we're talking about wouldn't really be. I do understand that deferral and forbearance are kind of interchangeable terms in a lot of ways, but we are talking about them in a very different sense, where we're talking about a forbearance as the suspension or reduction of payments over a period of time. So that's where the borrower has a temporary hardship and needs that relief, the kind of relief that where, they're just not being asked to make their payments. And this payment deferral is what we have put in place to transition out of that forbearance.
Got it. Yeah.
You'd have to really be delinquent in any way to get the payment deferral. So if you were due for May 1st, there wouldn't really be an option for you no matter what. No matter, if even if it was available today, it wouldn't really be a useful option.
Okay, so I just thought it was something that, where they're current and they're able to just get like a chunk of their, the next 3 months or something of their mortgage payments deferred to the end of the loan, something like that. But yeah.
So effectively, you can do it that way, but it technically is two separate programs. You'd first be offering forbearance to suspend the payments, which is doing really the same thing, and then at the end of it, you're deferring those payments to the end of the loan.
Okay. So that's the next step after forbearance. Got it. Thank you.
Right. If they can't reinstate, just via a restatement or a repayment plan, that's when you could do that. And the reason that we do our requirements this way is, the borrower, if you put them on a 3-month forbearance, they might need longer than that, right? So, we don't want to do what we consider a permanent solution, like a payment deferral, before the hardship's been resolved. We want to see how long that hardship really is to go, right? And then also see what the circumstances are once they get there, because maybe at that point it becomes a permanent hardship and they need a flex mod. You just don't know.
Gotcha. Okay, understood. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, next question comes from Amanda. Amanda, your line is open.
Hi, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on the previous two questions, actually. So if we have a borrower that's coming off a forbearance plan either this month or next month, and we're evaluating them for an extend or a cap and extend mod, and they begin their trial payments, would they be eligible to then transition to a deferment instead?
So, I mean, kind of. so they could request to cancel the trial period plan and then be evaluated for a payment deferral. In which case, yes. Probably isn't the smoothest way to go though, because they might then also have like a gap period where they're not on the trial or the forbearance for some period of time after they canceled and until the payment deferral settles. And then they might lose some of the protections that you'd get under the CARES Act. So if you have that situation, really, the best method would probably be to talk to the borrower about their options. I mean, you could certainly, there's nothing stopping you from putting them on to an extend or cap and extend mod, but in the event that you think that you agree with the borrower and the best scenario would be to extend the forbearance instead until July and then put them onto the payment deferral, you can do that. And again, the recommendation from our side would be you're essentially kind of setting up a trial period plan, but tell the borrower, we certainly don't want to encourage further delinquency. If the borrower is ready to pay, tell them to make their payments but keep that forbearance protection in place. I think that would probably be the best way to handle it.
Okay, so that would be our better avenue to take with that, because we had some concerns in our legal department over the cap and extend mods conflicting with some of the verbiage in the CARES Act. So that discussion came up today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something we're going to be looking at too. We've had a lot going on, so we haven't really had a chance to look too deeply into that issue, but sure. we have heard about it.
Yeah, we're trying to avoid any legal pursuits down the road. So yeah, we'll definitely encourage the borrower to just keep making the payments under the forbearance period until July 1st when the deferment program comes live. Then I think that's the smoother way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Next question comes from Michael. Michael, your line is open.
Hi, I had a question about if there are specific states, such as Massachusetts, that require us to offer forbearance to customers even if they were already delinquent prior to the 3/1 declaration date. In those cases, how would we address those specific scenarios?
So actually, we require that too if the borrower is attesting. Well, just in general, actually, our regular forbearance for Freddie Mac guidelines doesn't say you can't enter into a forbearance plan because of delinquency. But our regular, this is for non-COVID-19, just regular hardships. We cap the forbearance plan at not going beyond 12 months of delinquency. But you can be delinquent when you enter into our forbearance plan. And then for COVID-19, we've actually even waived the 12-month delinquency cap based on our interpretation of the CARES Act. We have waived that because we do believe that the CARES Act makes it pretty clear that if the borrower attests to a COVID-19 related hardship and requests a forbearance, that they can get that forbearance regardless of delinquency. So, we would tell you that you not only can you, but you must actually put those borrowers in a forbearance plan if they're attesting to the COVID-19 hardship and asking for it.
Okay, I think I actually misspoke and said forbearance. What I actually meant was if a state is requiring that we offer deferral, payment deferral option, even if the customer was already delinquent entering into the 3/1 date.
So I think we'd probably need to better understand the specifics of this requirement in order for me to have an intelligent response. And it looks like my boss has unmuted himself and might have something to say.
No, I was going to say, so we have reviewed, I don't remember the bill name off the top of my head. So I'm not, I think first off, we need to be careful in terms of what the actual language is, including when they say deferral, I think, our initial interpretation is, even though we didn't have this payment deferral product out, ExtendMod did work for it. We do not believe that it applied to anybody who was delinquent, but only to people who were on forbearance for a period of time. But generally, we do continue to we understand that there are new state laws in just about every state being reviewed, and some are even being passed at record paces, whether it's related to foreclosure moratoriums or loss mitigation. A number of them, most of them, exempt government-sponsored or government agency loans, or any type of loan that's subject to federal law, which would be ours. Some do not. We continue to review those with our counsel, and then with the counsel at our regulator and conservator to gain clarity when we feel like there isn't any. And anytime we can provide that type of clarity, we will. But for us, we believe there's nothing in Massachusetts right now that would require you to do anything but different than following our guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Next question comes from Nani. Nani, your line is open.
Yes. If a customer does do a deferral, will this be a problem if they want to refinance the mortgage?
So I'm not positive that decision has been finalized, but it wouldn't really be something that comes through our team on servicing policy. It's really an origination credit policy issue. But I know it's at minimum. I know it's something that they've looked at, and I think you'll probably want to wait to see some further guidance from them in the future. Now that we've announced this.
Okay. And the other question I had is, when they do this deferral, are we just going to report back to the credit bureau as on time then, because those payments are put onto the back end then?
So we don't provide that level of granular, detailed feedback on credit reporting guidance, because it's really they're not our requirements. There's certain information in the CARES Act that provides some guidance on how to report when a loan's subject to something like a deferral. And then, I think CDIA has their guidance as well, and FCRA. So unfortunately on those matters, because they aren't our requirements, we're going to have to direct you to those three resources.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Next question comes from Rebecca. Rebecca, your line is open.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hi. I have a question about the cap and extend. I heard that we will need to do trial payments for those individuals that we're doing the cap and extend. Is that correct?
Yes, the cap and extend and the extend mod both come with 3-month trial period plans.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great. Another question that just came in. So to be able to do the payment deferral, they would have to be in a forbearance plan that ends August 1st at the earliest. Is that correct?
So, as I mentioned, a forbearance plan is not necessarily required, but the evaluation would have to take place in July. So I think if the question is, what's the cleanest path towards a payment deferral, then yeah, that would be a forbearance plan where it's set to end at the end of July, and you've started to reach out at July 1st, and you've made contact with the borrower while on forbearance, evaluated them, and this is the right option, and then you would settle with the first payment due under the payment deferral terms on August 1st. That is correct. That would be the kind of, I guess, the best path, really.
All right, and last question comes from Tizania. Tizania, your line is open.
Yes, hi. Actually, the question from before, the previous question, maybe helped some, because I was thinking if the customer is in forbearance for April, May, and June, and it's out of that forbearance on July 1st. So I do my QRPC on June 1st with the customer. On July 1st, can the customer, so the customer cannot be on, we cannot work with the customer with a payment deferral for the July 1st?
So yeah, you can settle the payment. You can start evaluating on July 1st, and you can settle during the month of July. But what you're settling would be a payment deferral where the first payment due under the payment deferral terms would be August 1st.
Okay, so I
so
could,
they would
if
become
the customer,
current for. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, if the customer can, we can collect the payment for July and then work the payment deferral for starting August?
Right. Yeah, you can do that, and I would say the best way to do that too would be to keep the forbearance active so that they get the protections of the forbearance, despite the fact that they're making the payment, and then transition directly from the forbearance that's now been extended one additional month to a payment deferral, and then as of August 1st, they're current and they have their payment due and they're current, and the rest of the payments have been deferred.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, John. And just as a reminder, folks, we do have, please visit our COVID-19 resource page for FAQ documents and training opportunity as well. So before we log off, I just want to let you guys know also that there is a quick polling survey that will be located on the right side of your screen. If you can just take a few moments to complete that, that'd be greatly appreciated. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Don for closing remarks.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us again today on the Servicer Information Session. Great information exchange and excellent questions. We appreciate it. We hope you got all your answers today, but if not, please submit them, and we'll be sure to get back to you at the next session with those answers as well. So with that, we'll conclude, and have a great day.